Subcommittee. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Will Hurd.
Thank you. I don't think this is a cup holder. I hate to break this to the folks that planned this event. I think you got the title wrong. It's not FITARA, the way forward. It's the Conley-ISA way forward, right? You know, Jerry always tells me this is not FITARA. It's the Conley-ISA bill. So it's great to be here, and it's really has been a joy working with Congressman Conley on all these issues. I never would have thought when I was campaigning in West and South Texas that I'd be speaking on FITARA as much as I do, but it's a great bill. It's a way to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. It's a way to make the federal government more efficient, and it's good to see you, Jerry. Thanks for staying a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then go into kind of our subcommittee and what we plan on doing, and maybe talk about the scorecard that we're also doing on FITARA. But real quick, show of hands, who actually are employees or IT professionals in the federal government? Excellent. Folks that provide goods and services into the federal government? Press? Make sure I got my eye on y'all. Students? Got any students here? Okay. So I was born and raised in San Antonio, and went to Texas A&M University, got a degree in computer science. If some of y'all are looking for someone to do some Fortran 77 coding, let me know. I'm your guy. I think I could bang some of that out even now. And when I graduated from A&M, I went straight into the CIA. I was an undercover officer. You know, I was in the National Clandestine Service, so I was the dude in the back alleys at 4 o'clock in the morning, collecting intelligence on threats to the homeland. I spent 2 years here in Washington, D.C., 2 years in India, 2 years in Pakistan, 2 years in New York City doing interagency work, and then a year and a half in Afghanistan, where I managed all of our undercover operations. And one of the reasons I left in order to run for Congress was because one of my other jobs was briefing members of Congress. And not everybody is Jerry Conley, right? And I was pretty shocked, and my mama always said, you're either part of the problem, part of the solution, and I decided to run for Congress. I lost. I'm glad I don't tell that story anymore. And one of the things I also did when I was in the CIA is I did do some offensive cyber operations. I will probably never go to Moscow, because even now as a member of Congress, they will probably harass me when I land on their shores because of some activity I was involved in that they found out I was involved in. And when I lost, I became a partner in a consulting firm, helped companies grow in markets they had never been before. A company would come to us and say, hey, the Shanghai Stock Exchange is getting ready to open to 30 non-Chinese companies. How do we get in? Or a Mexican company would come to us and say, we've operated in Latin America for 72 years. We're about to buy a plant in the Philippines. What are those external factors that are going to impact our ability to make business decisions? And we would answer that question. And a lot of our clients would say, well, we have a cybersecurity issue. And the firm was mainly former CIA officers, and being good CIA officers, we would apply with, we know a guy. And I helped start a cybersecurity company called FusionX, recently purchased by Accenture. And it was a great experience. And we did technical vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. We mimicked APTs. And so that experience really was invaluable in doing some of the things that we're doing now. And the opportunity came to run in 2014, took it, and now we're here. It's crazy to think it's been a year. The first question I always got, first 7 weeks I was here, the press would always ask me, how'd the black dude get elected in a Hispanic district? Because I represent a 71% Hispanic district, and part of it is being right on the issues. But what's funny is you look at what people care about. It's national security, it's cybersecurity. I represent from San Antonio to El Paso. That's 820 miles of the border, 29 counties, 2 time zones. This takes 10 and a half hours to drive from one corner to the other, going 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit, which is really the speed limit in 75% of the district. And I get asked the same 2 questions. I've done 120 meet and greets and town halls. I've done 9 teletown halls where we basically call everybody in the district. I get asked the same 2 questions on each one of them. First one's about Iran. Second one is cybersecurity. And that question on cybersecurity gets asked 100 different ways, but this is an issue that people care about. And so it's great being in a position as a chairman of the subcommittee to deal with some of these issues. And we're looking at 4 issues. Cybersecurity. Here in Washington, D.C., that means information sharing. You know, I made a joke at the last South by Southwest. I was with all these IT entrepreneurs. I said, amongst all y'all, I'm in the upper bottom third of people that understand technology. But in Washington, D.C., I'm on the top 1%. You know, I had an old colleague that always said, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, all right? But guess what? Good thing, we're going to have to start talking about something other than information sharing, because that legislation is going to be in this omnibus bill. And so we got to start thinking, okay, now we got a framework in which to share information. DHS is going to be the belly button. What information should we be sharing? We got to make sure it's actionable, all right? And we got to make sure it's timely. And how do we do that? And how do we make sure the federal government, any information that they have, that we're giving it to the private sector so the private sector can protect itself? And this is a really big issue. The second issue that we're looking at is privacy. Privacy, again, running for Congress, I didn't think this was going to be where I'm going to be spending as much time as I do on this issue. And I think it's very simple. We can protect our civil liberties and our digital infrastructure at the same time. Good to see you, Jerry. One more round for Jerry. Really is a leader. Really is a leader on these issues. But I also, one of the issues I think, my staff they get nervous when I start going off script. Sorry, Madison. One of the biggest issues that we're going to be dealing with, I think, in 2016 is the issue of encryption, and this is intimately tied to privacy, right? And again, my fundamental belief is encryption is important for our national security, and it's important for our economy, and we need to do everything we can to strengthen it. Now, we also need to be working with law enforcement so that we can help solve challenges for law enforcement. And so how that plays out is going to be the big issue in 16. I think one of the issues, I feel like sometimes law enforcement community and private sector are talking past one another when it comes to these issues. I think that this is an issue of attribution. Attribution is a little bit different overseas than it is here in America. And if two people are talking on an encrypted channel, you already know a whole lot of information about those two individuals, all right? And there's opportunities to leverage that knowledge to help law enforcement do what law enforcement needs to do. And as a proud member that had come out of as a professional intelligence officer or a former professional intelligence officer, I sometimes forget to say former, and everybody freaks out. It's shocking to me. If you would have asked me back in September of 2001. So I started in the CIA October 2000, the day I started my drive from San Antonio to Washington, D.C., the day of the coal explosion. And I was in the CIA when 9/11 happened. I remembered in August how everybody in CTC, the Counterterrorism Center, was nervous. We went to bed scared, we woke up scared because we thought something was going to happen. And if you would have told me back then it would be 14 years before another major attack on our homeland, I would have said you were crazy. But the only reason there hasn't been one is because the men and women in our diplomatic corps, our intelligence services, law enforcement are working as if it's September 12th, 2001. Right? So these are hardworking, God-fearing, red-blooded Americans that are trying to keep us safe. But we got to move this conversation beyond weakening encryption. And I'm hoping in 2016 we do that. Third issue that we're following is emerging technology. I made a comment once. So there is a stretch of Highway I-10, Interstate 10, that goes from Fort Stockton to El Paso, which is literally nothing for about 2 hours. And I made a comment of how I wish, when I'm driving my car, Whataburger, which is a chain in Texas, would fly a drone and drop that burger through the sunroof of my car, And how awesome would it be for my car to be driving itself, all right? And so these are some of the issues that we're trying to look at. And specifically, how do we prevent an overly burdensome regulatory environment from stifling growth, stifling entrepreneurship? And I think it's a real problem, and it's a real challenge. And the fourth area, that we're looking at is IT procurement. Again, not a topic I thought I'd be not once did I say IT procurement on the campaign trail. All right, you don't hold rallies for IT procurement, but it's an important issue. And what's funny is my chief of staff, he was down with me in the district just early on in the start of our tour, or what I guess tenure, I guess is the right word, and we were in Fort Stockton, small town in West Texas, and my chief had never seen me speak in front of a crowd since getting elected. He goes, "What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "IT procurement." And his face goes ashen, all right? But when you tell people, and y'all all know this, Jerry mentioned earlier, that when you tell people that the federal government is spending over $80 billion a year on IT procurement and 80% of that's on legacy systems, they're immediately outraged, right? They don't understand why we're doing that. You know, it's why are we not doing more on the cloud, right? We have a cloud first policy, right? The cloud's not new technology. Why aren't we moving forward? Because there are folks within some of the agencies that say it's not very secure. I'd take the cloud over some of these agencies, and you can see that by some of the grades that we have doled out on the FITARA scorecard. So this is an issue that we're looking at. This is an issue where we need a lot of help. You know, in my whopping 11 months here, I know some of the big issues. The people that buy and sell IT goods and services are not the same people that use those IT goods and services. So when you have that disconnect, you're going to have problems. You know, I've recently learned that in the procurement process, procurement officers can't refine what they're looking for. That's exactly the point. That's the place where you should be refining what you need so that what you're purchasing and buying solves your actual problem. Right? And I think FITARA is a good thing to empower the CIO to have the responsibilities that they need. We did a hearing with Department of Interior, and I was pretty shocked. The CIO for the Department of Interior asked, how big is your budget? I said $1 billion. Okay, let's set that aside. That seems a little high. That's expensive Wi-Fi in the Grand Canyon. And I said, how much do you control? And the answer was like 14, 20, somewhere between 14 and 21%. You're the CIO of the entire agency and you only have budget authority of less than a quarter of that budget. That's not a way to run a business, right? And so FITARA's point is to make that change. One of the things that we're grading is and checking is the CIO involved in signing off on purchasing of IT goods and services. Very small first step. You know, I talk with folks in the private sector or academia, and they're like, "Will, the federal government needs to, instead of having their CISO under the CIO, they need to have it under the senior risk officer." And they get, I'm like, time out. Let's get a CISO, right? And so making sure our agencies reflect and are following some of the proper best practices of good digital hygiene, of operating a business, it's really important. So those are some of the areas that we're looking at, and real quick, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. The scorecard. One of the things I always stress is all the data that we used in the scorecard was provided by the agencies. So there was no subjective, decisions made on what we were reviewing. And so when you look at the scores, shocking, nobody got an A on the 4 areas we're looking at. There was 3 Bs, is that right, Madison? And the majority Ds, Cs and Ds. And it says that we have a lot of places to grow, room to grow, and we're looking at updating the scores probably twice a year. And this is something that we can. We're looking for the agencies to be honest in the information that they provide. One is data consolidation, pretty straightforward. Everybody's supposed to count, how many data centers they have, and they can say, hey, this is where we're supposed to shrink. Are you meeting those goals? Right? Again, it's data they provided, and it's shocking every time GAO and IG does a report, they end up finding more data centers, which is how do you not know what resources you have and you're in control of. Portfolio stat, we're looking at that is, what are the savings everybody thinks they can realize and how close are they in achieving that. The third area we're looking at is kind of the CIO authorities, and we're reviewing that based on projects that are delivering every 6 months. So how many major investments do you have in the IT world, and are those projects are you seeing deliverables every 6 months, right? Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. And the fourth area we're looking at, Madison, which one did I forget? Yeah, risk, yes, risk. Again, the risk the agency has in achieving or not achieving some of these projects. Again, they provide the details on that issue. So it's a good first start. We're looking to possibly expand as this goes. Look at all the 7 areas. The other areas are a little bit more difficult to have to be less subjective on, or it's a lot harder to be objective, I guess is the way I should say that. But this is something, a tool that the OMB should be using, Tony Scott is using in order to grade and make sure we're reflective of where we should be. And at the end of the day, excuse me, if we get this right, we're reducing the size and scope of the federal government. If we get this right, we're being more efficient in the provision of services to the American people. And hopefully, we let the American people keep more of their money in their own pockets rather than sending it up here. So I'll stop there and open it up to Q&A. Yes, sir.
Hey, Zach Noble with FCW. I was wondering if you could comment on the information sharing legislation that's being attached to the omnibus bill. Mm-hmm. Are you satisfied with the conferenced version? Can you give your thoughts there?
Sure. I think the conference version was a good solution. I think the key is to make sure you have liabilities protections in there in order to make sure that private sector companies can share amongst themselves from with the federal government. You got to have that incentive to do that. That's in there. I think making Department of Homeland Security the belly button on these issues is the absolute right move. The language on Einstein 3 is something that we worked on pretty significantly. This is a very basic tool that we should be including in our toolkit. That provision is included. So I think at the end of the day, it's a good bill. And I tell people, this isn't even the first chapter in the book. This is the preface. All right, and this is a baseline, and now the question is going to be, how do we make that information sharing work, and then what's the next step? But at the end of the day, when you look at the Homeland bill, the HPSI bill, Senate bill, the final version is somewhere in between there, right? Which is good, and the president already said that if this was standalone legislation, he'd sign it. Next question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Tom Dickinson with TechCast Global. In what ways is FITARA, or is it not, an update of Klinger-Cohen, and is there a DoD emphasis of any kind?
A good question, and I'm probably not the right person to ask that question because my frame of reference is fairly limited. But at the end of the day, DoD should be part of this, right? DoD, they have the largest spend, I think, in this area. One of the things that you see, and anytime there's really implementation of something, everybody's looking for an exception. The whole point of having these things is to not be an exception, right? Is to make sure everybody's following basic practices and basic standards. So DoD should be part of this. Again, they're so big, so at times unwieldy, that we need to be looking at them, because even there, I really need them to be nimble and fast and efficient. 24th and 25th Air Force is in San Antonio, and their role in protecting our cyber infrastructure is important, and I need them to be able to get the newest and latest and greatest thing as quickly as they possibly can. And so this will help in achieving that end goal. So it's important for everybody to be following this and be used to these same standards. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Congressman Hurd, I'm Art Wu. I was formerly on the VA committee. We did the original legislation empowering the CIO in 2006. I'm not sure how far they've gone and what they use, but I think that Daryl and Jerry did that as a template. It intrigued me, you asked a question about self-reporting. We looked at that for 17 years. And when the agency self-reports, we never believed what they said. Mm-hmm. And then OMB and GAO would go back and say, well, you gave yourself a C, we give yourself an F. So what do you think we need to do on the self-reporting, or what your feelings are on that?
Well, considering that with self-reporting that most of the scores were C's and D's, I think it's with that much data, how do you not self-report? Right? I don't know the answer to that. The IG offices are not big enough. The GAO is not big enough. So if you have some opinions, or folks here have some opinions, let me know. I'm interested in hearing that. But let's talk about VA real quick. It's 2015, and the soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine is told when they get out of the military to print out their health record. That's outrageous. We should, in this day and age, we should be able to push a button and one goes to the other, right? VA, DOD said, don't worry. We're working on fixing that problem. 4 years, almost $500 million. And they said, our bad. This is a really hard problem to try to join both of the things. So we're going to go our own separate ways, but we'll make sure we're communicating with each other. And then folks had the audacity to sit in front of our committee and say, oh, we're meeting all the recommendations of being interoperable. Right? The Joint Legacy Viewer, and I told this up front in the hearing, is not interoperability. It's the equivalent of using a microfiche. Y'all know what microfiche is here, but I taught at high school, they're like, what's a microfiche? Right? So for me, that's a huge problem. And guess what? What's funny is DoD and VA were actually leaders in industry in developing electronic health records. And now they're lagging behind. And if we're able to fix that problem, the two largest healthcare providers in the world, if we solve that problem with those two, then we could, that showing leadership in the rest of the world when it comes to an electronic health record. So this is an issue that is important to me because I think it's pretty outrageous. And if we're going to give better care, when that veteran goes into a VA clinic, they should be able to have access to all their records when they were in DoD to make sure that doctor is giving them the right care that they need. So this is one of those examples of you get all the people in the room, and one of the things that I wish more of the folks that come in front of our subcommittee recognize is that when I ask a question, I already know the answer to it. And my goal is to see if they give me the same answer, which I know to be true. And oftentimes, it's not necessarily the case. So sorry for the tangent and the long-winded answer to your question, but all this stuff is interconnected. And part of the problem, I think, is Congress has failed on its job of oversight. A lot of times we look for the splashy headlines, but we're not digging into the weeds. We're not looking at trying to make sure that government is functioning the way it's supposed to. There's a question here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lotta Barnhart. I'm with FEMA, and I am a 28-year cybersecurity officer in the Air Force. So I have seen for decades Congress attempting to fix IT acquisition, especially in the DoD, starting there, and it hasn't. What's your opinion on how much progress we've made, and do you think it's really a resistance to change or an attitude issue, or are there other root causes that would explain our failure to improve?
So in my 11 months perspective, we're not very good at this, right? And so I don't have a working knowledge of some of the previous attempts, but if those previous attempts got us here, we got a long way to go, right? And it's culture. So it's funny. I thought, the first couple of months, I was like, maybe we need changes to the FAR. But it's funny, when I talk to people, they're like, we don't need changes to the FAR. The FAR is fine. It's the implementation of that, right? It's how the procurement officers, interpret the FAR. And that's the problem. So that tells me that's a culture issue. Right? So it's culture, we've been doing things the same way we always have. We're incentivizing the wrong behavior. Right? One of the things that I want to make sure is if you realize savings in your IT infrastructure, that agency should be able to use that savings. And don't just be like, next year we're going to cut you, because you made that savings. That's not going to incentivize the right kind of behavior. So I think it's culture. I think it's managerial. I think it's leadership, and I think all that stuff goes back to culture. And FITARA's, I think, is the right step to empower the CIOs. But here's the funny thing: so all the CIOs in the federal government, we're working to give you all a lot more responsibility and authority. But guess what? We're also going to hold you accountable when we give you that responsibility and authority. And I think that's the right way to go. I think we got one more? 2 minutes. We got one more. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman, given the information sharing being the first step, what do you think are the next steps to improve the cybersecurity posture of the United States?
Very good question. And when I so I can answer this two ways. Information sharing. When I think of information sharing, I think of much larger than just protecting our digital infrastructure. So when I look at the threats that we're faced with today, and this issue of a lone wolves are hard to get. And I've seen how information sharing in the intelligence community has changed significantly. From October 2000 to August 2009, light years. From August 2009 to January 2015 or 14, light years difference, right? So we're improving that way. But where we can be doing better is local law enforcement, private security companies, right? They're all collecting information, and is that getting into the national macro intelligence networks? No, it's not. And so if we can help improve some of these micro networks and have them connecting to the what I call the macro national intelligence framework, I think we can solve some problems. And that's good not only for counting terrorists, it's also good for stopping hackers, it's good for stopping cyber criminals. I think that's an area where we need to go, is how we get that stuff on the ground. And we have some ideas, and this is one of those areas that we're talking. So, look, I really appreciate being here today. I'm glad y'all didn't let Rich ask a question. He would ask me a hard question. Good to see you, buddy. But look, it's thanks for what y'all do. I appreciate y'all being here, and let's hope we're out of here on Thursday. So, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.